Okay, and we're back. It's COMP1050 Animation 2D Tools, Lesson 5, Part 4. And we're talking about drawing shapes. How do we do this? Well, we don't necessarily have to use the library at all if we're going to try and draw shapes. In fact, you can draw a lot of your basic stuff by hand if you want, right through ActionScript, right? Now, for more complex shapes, I recommend that you still have a library file of some sort, because I think that's what the strength of using Flash in the first place is, right? But I think if you want to, you can also use basic drawing shapes to create your objects. So here's an example of how it works. You have to use this graphics layer. Every object that you create has a graphics layer anyway, and you can create this graphics property for it. So here's how you would do this. This.graphics.line_style if you're creating a line. And then what you're going to do is you're going to say the starting point for the line. And what you're going to be doing also is you're going to say the color. So here's my line style, right? So my color would be, this would be a black line, right? Here's the starting point, 100, 200, and you're going to go to 150, 250, right? So this is 2 pixels thick, black, and it's a line that's goes from 100 to 150, about 50 pixels wide, and maybe a little bit more, maybe about 100 pixels. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. If you go to drawingshapes.fla, you can see the completed all the shapes here. But let's just go one by one. So now I can also make a curve like this. How do I do that? This.graphics.curve2, and then I need what I need is 2 points, 200, 300, and 250, 250 as an example. And then basically the line sequence, we complete the line sequence just like this. So we say the end of the line. So from a curve, instead of, if you go back, it starts off with move to. Instead of move to in line 2, you say curve to in line 2, and you've got your curve. Right? So 2 commands to create this curve that we've got right here. Okay? For rectangles, it's pretty much the same way. You have your height and your width, right? And also the upper left-hand corner position. So 50-50 is the upper left-hand corner, and then you've got your width and your height, 300 by 250. And now you get your rectangle, right? So that's how you do a rectangle. You can also draw a round rectangle with rounded edges, right? And again, you've got a couple of extra parameters with width and height and the curved corners. The curved corners are 25 pixels apiece, right? You can also do a circle and an ellipse, right? They're the draw circle and draw ellipse methods, right? And again, for the draw circle, it's the points, the center point, and the radius, right, for the circle. And for the ellipse, what you want to do is the upper left and size parameters as for the rectangle, right? So you can create your ellipse. When you look at the diagram, right, if you want to fill in a shape, right, you can do a begin fill and an end fill. So let's say, for example, I want to make the shape filled in. The circle is going to be a gray circle or a black circle. I can use the begin fill, I can draw the circle, and then the end fill, and then whatever I put in the middle of that will be filled in, for filled in shapes. Let's take a look at that document. So here we are, and I'm going to open up drawingshapes.fla, and if I run it, we get the shape, the happy face, right? How does it look? From an ActionScript perspective, it looks like this. We've got a bunch of this.graphics.line_style, this.graphics.move_to, this.graphics.line_to. So there's a bunch of this.graphics. Right? And I think that's the basic thing you have to know. When you're creating a drawing through ActionScript, you have to think about this.graphics. If I didn't use this, and if I just use graphics.line_style, would it work? Why do I need to use this? Or do I? Well, the answer is you don't. Not right now. Right? You need to use it later on. If you just use graphics.lineStyle, it should do the same thing, right? This points to the stage object. You can also draw your line, right? And you can associate it with a sprite container, which we'll talk about in a bit. Okay. Let's talk about text. So far, we've talked about TLF text a lot when we use Flash. But let's talk about simple text fields, right? Simple text fields, you have to define a text field as a new text field object, right? Then you have the text property of the text object, and that you assigned whatever the text is. If you just add child, it'll be the top left corner of the screen. Just like any other object, you have to indicate where on the screen X and Y coordinates you're going to place it. You can also set the width and the height of the field itself. So let's say even though it'll wrap around the size of your text, you may want to predefine how big the text field is itself. If you want to see where the text is, you can look at the border property, and you can set that to true, and it'll put a border around the text. If you want to make your text selectable, you have to indicate that your selectable is clicked to true, not false, like it normally is. If you don't make it selectable, right, your text will stay with a point. If you leave it the way it is, the default, right, when you hover over the text, your cursor will change to a text editing cursor. So an example of that would be, I'm just going to go back. I believe the text file is called drawingtext.fla. So I'm going to open up File, Open, and here's drawingtext.fla. Here it is. And I run it. And if I hover over it, my cursor doesn't change into a text editing cursor, right? Because I've got this value here, which is selectable is equal to false, right? Again, I can define a font, I can define a text size, and I can define if it's bold or not, right? Funny enough, though, if you want to change the color, that's where you have to do a little bit more work. Like, for example, if I want to change the color, font size and bold is equal to true, but I want to change the color here, if I go my format dot, and I want to get some code hinting here, so I'm going to use the code hinting, show code hinting option here on the top of my development environment. And if I try and say color, right, if you notice, it really doesn't give me the option, right? I'm actually accessing a class that doesn't belong, right? Which doesn't make any sense. There is no color format, right? There's other formats. If I press the dot accessor and use my code hinting, I can change the length of the object. I can change its button mode, as an example. I can change its alpha, and so on. But if I skip down, right, I don't have an option for its color, right? So how do I do that? And you have to basically, it's much more challenging for you to change the color of a text object than anything else. Example of this would be this. If I said, well, I want to do it anyway. Let's just do it. So dot color is equal to, I don't know, I'll set a value like FFF, white, right? And I save it and I run it. It's going to give me an error. And the errors are really funky in ActionScript, like we talked about. Down here it says scene 1, layer 1, frame 1, line 8, access of undefined property FFF. So obviously it doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about, right? And then also gives me another issue, error 1119, access of possibly undefined property color through a reference with static type flash.text text format. So it doesn't know what color is. Never seen that before. Similarly, if I put just a regular color and I say is equal to, a value, whatever the value is, FFF, right? And I run it, it's going to not give me compile errors, but it's also not going to do anything. If you notice, there's nothing that's doing here. There's no output. From a compile error perspective, I don't get a compile error, but I don't also get what I've asked for. So this is an issue. How do I color text if I need to? The other option is this. What if you made your text into an object, right? Like you can change your text into a, into a graphic, right? Or if you have text that's in a library, you can call it up like any other object, right? So different ways of doing these things. However, if you're really confounded, you can always go online and go color text field AS3. And if you were to do that, it'll give you how to format your text fields. I'm just accessing one random location, right? I want to color my text field. And here I'm creating a text field, and I say text color, the text color property of 0xFF000, right? So let's see if I can do that with the text color property. So again, going back to ActionScript. Here I'm using a format for my text, but really maybe what I have to do is here on the actual text itself, I can go my text dot, and I used my code hinting. I start typing text color. That's what it said to do, right? But it doesn't have an option. And that's what I say to you. I say it's better for you to look at some of this stuff. Here's a text format, and here's dot color, and then I'm using the hexadecimal value. So I had the right idea, but I have to use the hexadecimal value instead of another kind of value. So going back, my format dot color is equal to the hexadecimal value, which let's make it RGB, make it red text, and launch it. And there it is. Now it's red. Okay. So again, slowly we can design our interface the way we like. Going back. Linked text is very similar to regular text, but it provides us with a URL. We actually create an href anchor tag that we link to it. I remember we had this problem before when we were linking to any kind of, we had a link inside ActionScript itself when we created our Flash banner ad, that it gave us a security warning. And it'll do it again if you, in some browsers. So I'm going to skip over this one and go to creating Sprite Groups. All right, here's where we get interesting. So remember, in other languages, sprites are just containers. That's what they are, right? In fact, in many ways, okay, and I'll say it like this, sprites and movie clips are identical. Okay, I'll say it again, sprites and movie clips are identical. So if I create a sprite, just think about a sprite as something to contain other graphics, okay? So here's an example. I'm creating a sprite. I've called it Sprite1, and it's of type Sprite. It's a new sprite, and I'm actually adding in. Remember, before it was this.graphics.lineStyle. Now I'm doing Sprite1.graphics.lineStyle, and I'm making a line of 2 pixels width, and it's going to be. We're going to fill it up with this gray color, and we're going to draw a rectangle from the top left corner of the screen, and it's going to be 200 wide and 200 high. A square, actually, is what it is. Right? We're going to add that child to the sprite. but the sprite itself hasn't been added to the screen, right? The sprite itself also has to have an X and Y coordinate that we're adding on. So here's our X and Y coordinate of the sprite, 50 and 50, right? But the sprite itself, so sprite 1 hasn't been added to the stage, right? This graphic, this line has been added to the chain. We've added sprite 1 itself. I've added this here to the stage, right? And then I define as X and Y coordinates. Here's sprite 2. We've got another sprite. Again, sprites, containers. That's all they are. Think about them as containers, right? I got another sprite, and this time it's got a different line style, right? And different colors and so on. And it's at a different position, right? I'm adding that onto the stage. Okay, now we're going to add a third sprite, and the third sprite is also going to have a line drawn into it and a circle, okay? And it's also going to have a position. But this time, I'm going to add this third sprite to sprite 1. How do I do that? I've already got a line on sprite 1, and now I'm going to put a circle on top of it as well, right? Well, every time I add a new object on top of another object, it layers exactly like we have phantom layers in Flash. So the bottom layer is the one at the bottom. And as they add in layer order, right? So I keep on layering as many objects as I want, one on top of the other. And as long as they have transparency, you can see all the way through. So let's run this file so we understand what we're doing here. It's called creating Sprite Groups.fla. Here it is. Run the movie. I have two objects, right? I have object 1 and object 2. If I click this object, the circle seems to jump from one sprite to the other. But if you remember, both of these objects, which are sprites, both of these objects, right, have a rectangle inside them. Each one of them. When I click on them, there's a add event listener that toggles the circle, which is another graphic sprite, and moves the parent of this sprite to the other one. So if I click on this one, this sprite is now a child of sprite number 1. If I do it again, this sprite that contains a circle is a child of sprite number 2. To see this in ActionScript, to understand how it works, we have our sprites defined. Sprite number 1, sprite number 2, and this time sprite number 3 is just a circle, right? Well, it's actually a square with a circle inside of it, right? When I have two event listeners, one for sprite number 1 and one for sprite number 2, right? But they go to the same place. The same function handles both of them. We're using here a shared event listener for the first time. How do I do that? I use this methodology, event.currentTarget.addChild. What does this mean? I'm looking at whatever target I'm clicking, and I'm adding sprite 3 again, to that sprite. In other words, every time I use my addChild command, I can add child as many times as I want. And every time I add child again and again, it'll move to whatever target I tell it to go to. It's very powerful, right? So I can add child to the stage, and then I can move my sprite. Instead of it being on the stage, I can move it to, one of the other sprites. Let's check that out. I'm going to create another event listener, third one, and we're going to make it the stage dot add event listener, right? And I'm going to do the same thing, right? I'm going to do a mouse event dot click, and it's also going to go to the same event handler, right? So here it is. Here's the event handler. It's going to go to this place, and it's going to say, wherever my current target is where my sprite's going to appear. Okay, let's run it. If I click the stage now, right, if you notice it moved, even though it's showing here, right, it's moved off center because now my stage is the center of my sprite. I'm moving it to this one or to this one. I can't do it anymore because my stage, the stage is now the event listener is the holder of the sprite. If I do it again, and I click this sprite, the stage is the one that takes precedent because it's the last event listener that I put on this thing. Because the stage is behind everything else. If I wanted it to go to another sprite that was the background, the same size as the stage, that's different. Okay? But anytime I click on these objects are children of the stage anyway. So when I click the stage, any object I click on it is an object of the stage. I'm actually clicking the stage. So I got to be careful what I'm doing here. So let's take this away. Okay, so that's how sprite groups work. And it's fully explained here, by the way. Current target is a real key. So I have a shared event listener. I want to write one event handler, right, to share amongst more than one listener. If it makes sense, it can handle it, and you can use the current target method to see which one was clicked. Sometimes I need to set up sprite depth, right? Like we talked about before. We want to layer one sprite around top of another one. We can use the set child index as an example to layer it wherever we want. So the display list is like an array, right? And whenever we add sprites on top of in the same environment, one on top of the other one, what we're really doing is we're creating new graphics layers, right? And they're added in the same order that we're adding the layers up. So I can use my set child index command to change the index of the current movie clip or sprite that I'm pointing at. I can also look and see if I want it so that if I want to change the movie clips, if I have 3 items, 0, 1, and 2, they've all been added into my array list or my display list, right, as an example. And what I want to do is I want the sprite to be on top of all the other ones. The way to do it is, actually there's 2 ways to do it. The first way is to say set child index to the number of children. I can use the number of children property of my stage or whatever container I'm looking at, and then -1. So if I have 3 children, -1, because remember we're using a 0-based array, 0, 1, 2, I can make it so that it's the last child, right? But the easier way to do it is to add it again. Just use the add child command again. If I use the add child command again, it goes to the top of the stack. Okay? So that's the much easier way to do it. Okay, we're going to pause the movie here.